Okay, I think we are almost there. Okay. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our panel from the College of Science addressing this topic of pluralism as we're discussing this week at Utah Valley University. I would like to thank our guests for joining us this morning. We have a great group of faculty and administration from the College of Science, and also the VP of Engaged Learning is joining us, so that's really exciting. So when we think about diversity, sometimes we think about science as really being just based on like facts. And is there really this issue of thinking about pluralism or thinking about wider issues of societal issues in the sciences? And I think, as we'll see from our presenters, that there's a lot of exciting things to think about when it comes to diversity, inclusion, pluralism in the sciences. And there's a lot of work we can still do. So I'm going to call on our presenters to just give a brief introduction of themselves, and then we'll get on to discussing some questions. I invite all of you watching to also put questions that you have in the chat for anybody, or just let us know you're there. So let's start with Dr. Eddy Kade.
That's my name. My name is Eddy Kade. I'm an associate professor here at UVU. I've been here for almost 20 years, more than 20 years rather. I'm with the Earth Science Department, and my background is environmental health.
Great, thank you.
Sure.
Do you want to say anything about diversity, inclusion, experiences you've had, or do you want to wait to address those a little bit later?
I can, let me say this though. I think that when it comes to the sciences and technology and diversity, our most valuable resource is the human being. And in the human being, understanding, interacting with, studying different types of human beings, whether they are from Africa or in Asia, wherever they may come from. It gives us a sense of culture. It gives us a sense of people's habits, the way people do things, different perspectives. And I think that when we are inclusive, when we promote diversity, we have access to this great resource. And what works in an area may not necessarily work as well. However, we may have at least access to information that may give us another perspective to try another way. So I think that it's a big benefit to have a diverse community in the sciences, so that we can understand, in order to help us better resolve our issues, differences, and also come up with the technology that helps us come even closer together.
Great, thanks, Eddy. Dr. Kade, sorry for that insight. Yeah, let's move. I'm just going to go alphabetical through our participants. So Dr. Fern Chan, you're next.
Hi, I am Fern Chan, and I appreciate the opportunity to be here with this fine group of people that I know most of them very well on this panel, and just outstanding humans, as Dr. Kade said, but also outstanding scientists and educators. My background is in analytical chemistry. I have been a member of the chemistry department for nearly 20 years. I served as chair of the department for the past four and a half years, and now I have moved into an associate dean position in the College of Science. And in that position, it's kind of strange not being a member of the faculty, but I'm getting a new perspective on issues that are faced more on a college level and a university level compared to a department level. I think it's really important to have this kind of discussion because we all come in to this world with a certain background and the way that we look at things, and we have a certain lens that we see things through, and it's very difficult to see things through other people's lens that have different backgrounds. And that is a hugely important thing, to be able to think about what someone else is thinking and how they're viewing things and their different approaches. So that's why I think this kind of conversation is hugely important. And, you know, being a woman in science, Dr. Wei Hong and me and Hilary, I don't know, we haven't really had the discussion about how we got into sciences, but maybe that's something we should talk about, and how our background led us to this position and this point in life. So maybe that's something we can talk about in this panel a little bit later. But anyway, that's enough about me. I'll talk more a little bit later.
Yeah, thank you so much. You raised so many great points. Thank you. We'll move now to Dr. Cheryl Hanewicz.
Hi, yes, I'm currently the Associate Provost for Engaged Learning, but I'm also a professor in technology management. And I've been in technology management for about 20 years. I started getting interested in this topic through my own experience. I started working back in the mid to late 80s and found myself, that's when computers kind of started, coming in to the workplace. And I was so excited about all of that. But I also started realizing that I was training people who were coming in with less education and sometimes less experience and making twice as much money as me. So after a while, that got my attention, and I thought, let me go back to school. And then I got into higher education, and also found very similarly that it was the males that were primarily getting the tenure track, and females were often in lecture positions, of which I was for a long time. So my interest, I really started looking at particularly the young women and the young men that were coming through, education, because this affects everybody. You're right, Eddie, this is a human problem, and we're each about 50% of the population. So if we're going to really achieve both fairly and economically, we need to engage, all sectors of the population. So I was very happy to be on this panel. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much. Dr. Josh Premo is next.
Hello, everybody. So I'm an assistant professor in the biology department. I just began my second year, and my background is actually in science education research. I was a first generation college student, which means that neither of my parents earned a four-year degree. My father worked as an aluminum worker in a factory, and my mom was a stay-at-home mom. And most of my research has been on social aspects of teaching and learning, dynamics in the classroom, and how do we get students to connect to one another in meaningful ways when learning. And I hadn't really thought about first generation college students once I had gotten my degree. I taught as a science teacher for a while in middle and high school, and then I ended up going back for my PhD up in Washington State University. And it wasn't until the very end of my PhD that I started kind of thinking more about what is the connection between these types of social experiences in our science classrooms and the culture that first generation students bring into our science classrooms. A lot of the contemporary research looking at first generation students has found that first generation students are less likely to continue with a degree past their first semester. They're much less likely to continue, and particularly they're much less likely to continue in science. So very, very recently, over the last few years, there's been expanding research looking at what is it about science that tends to not support first generation students or set it up so that their values as first generation students might not directly be as in line with those that are typically represented in the way we teach science. So that's where my research has been kind of guiding towards over the last few years, particularly because at Washington State University, I was doing research in a classroom, an introductory biology classroom, large lecture of 525 students per section, where there wasn't a lot of communal support. There wasn't a lot of collaborative support for students. And it turns out that's directly impacting motivation and performance in the course. And maybe a little bit later, I'll talk more about that study and what we found and what it means for our first generation population at UVU, which is substantial. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that insight with us. That's really important, and I'm excited to learn from you too. Next, we have Dr. Wei Hong Wang.
Hi, great. I'm going to share my screen. I have a short PowerPoint here. Okay, great. Usually I'm always the last one because of my last name. Today is different. It's a different good change. So I'm Wei Hong Wang, associate professor of earth science. I joined UVU in 2012. So it has been almost 8 years. So far, it's a great experience. So I just tell you a little bit about myself. I'm a girl who flew across Pacific Ocean to come here to realize my dreams. Be honest, I didn't know what I'm getting into in the beginning. In the end, I chose science in my professional career. So my master's degree was in geology and the PhD was in marine science. Those two disciplines, they are interconnected, but at the same time, they are male dominated. So I'm a female Chinese student at the beginning, and then later on, I became a female Chinese professor in earth science. It's very interesting to see the differences when I was in China, because I did my undergraduate studies in China and then did my graduate studies here to see in earth science, this particular discipline, how things are different and diversity is very different in those two countries as well. And personally, I was benefited a lot by diversity. At the same time, I was challenged by diversity, from academic to professional work to my daily life. Right now, I teach a diverse group of students. At the same time, I work with a diverse group of students in research. So I realized, we all come from different backgrounds. For example, I have different identities. I'm Chinese, I'm a female, I'm a professor in earth science. So even though it seems like so many different identities, but in the end, I am not diverse because I'm a single person. So diversity is a property of a group. So my group has been very dynamic since I involve students from international, including international students, non-traditional students, and also first generation students. I realized our group is very productive just because we have so much to contribute from each of us. And also I work with a diverse faculty and staff at UVU. Then it has been very great experience. But at the same time, as a female minority in earth science, it was challenging too, because most of the people view, earth science, geology, marine science, the professors should be male, should be with a beard, rugged, individuals. But for me, when they see me, they see a different story. So diversity is important, but we do face a lot of challenges. I do want to say there are so many great outcomes from diversity, just based on my personal experience. It fosters creativity, promotes innovation, and drives excellence across a broad social spectrum. This is not my words. So there are so many abundant evidence, showing these are the, the outcome when we work in a diverse community. So in the end, I want to share with you today is the Mid-Autumn Festival in China. So if tonight you get together with your family members, diversity could be a good topic to chat with your family. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Wang, for sharing those. Really appreciate you sharing some of your own life with us and seeing how we can all benefit from diversity. Thank you so much. We have Dr. Britt Wyatt next.
Hi, everyone. I'm also going to share my screen, and I'm going to try not to repeat what everyone else has said, but maybe kind of summarize everything. So I'm what am I talking about? I'm a new professor here at UVU, so I just started this fall semester. I'm in the biology department, and I'm going to talk a little bit about my experience and research in inclusive education. And so I'll talk a little bit about how my own journey and identities has really influenced that path. I grew up in rural Alaska, went to Colorado State University for my bachelor's in microbiology, completed my PhD in molecular biology at Marquette University, and then I did a postdoc in biology education research at the Rochester Institute of Technology. And this was through the Inclusive Excellence Initiative. And so we really worked on trying to increase inclusive learning environments, both for research mentors in the community and with teachers in the classroom. So what I want to say here is that this has been a journey for me, and I'm still learning, but a lot of these identities have influenced how I viewed diversity in STEM. And I'm still learning, and I'm recognizing my own biases, and I'm working towards inclusive action. Let's see if I can, oh, there we go. A lot of the things that I'll be talking about and might provide insights come from brilliant people, not myself. So I'm learning from a lot of other individuals. Ibram X. Kendi, who talks about how to be an anti-racist, Rhonda Montgomery, who has this amazing view on how to mentor students and treating them like plants. And it's a great resource to look at. Mary Catherine Woodson, who has taught me a lot about microaggressions and microaffirmations, and then also looking at White Fragility by Robin DiAngelo. So a lot of these individuals have provided frameworks for me to think about diversity in STEM. And so some of the research that I do right now is I look at the perceptions of what are scientists, like what does it mean to be a scientist, and how can we engage more students in becoming scientists in the future. So if you Google scientists and you just want to see like what images pop up, you'll notice that I just took a screenshot of this. And so when I was looking at these general images of what it means, or these images of scientists on Google, I noticed that most of these pictures are of people in a lab. They're wearing lab coats, they're pipetting, they have wonderful, colorful solutions. They all have microscopes. And they're also primarily light-skinned individuals. Now, if you Google diverse scientists, you'll notice something a little bit different. And with these images, you'll see an increase of people of color. The other thing that's really awesome with this is now that we have, when you Google diverse scientists, we start having collaborations and groups. Whereas before, if you just Google scientists, it's typically like an individual or maybe one or two in a lab. So now we have collaborations and groups. There's field work. So there's some different type of science that's happening. It's not all just in the lab. You also have kids that are now included into this picture, but you still have a lot of lab and lab coats. I think what this emphasizes here is that within our culture, there's racial stereotypes of what scientists should be. Other scientist stereotypes are gendered. So there's been a lot of studies looking at this, and for children who draw scientists, in the 1960s, less than 1% of children drew women scientists. Recent studies, that's now bumped up to around 50% of children are going to draw women scientists, but that decreases as children get older. So maybe when they start getting to like this age of deciding whether or not they're going to be interested in STEM, they're not going to be associating being a woman with being a scientist. So there's also gendered stereotypes of scientists. So why do we need diversity in science and technology? And I highlighted a lot of these visible identities, but it's also important to acknowledge that there are other identities as well. So you could have neurodiversity, someone on the spectrum, LGBTQ plus community, ability status, religion, family, ethnicity, culture, so many different identities that we want to consider within diversity. These identities are complex, they're multifaceted, and sometimes they fluctuate. And they also intersect. So when we talk about diversity in science and technology, it can cover a lot of different people, experiences, and background. And why is this important in science? There has been a lot of research on this, that diversity leads to better science. This is gender diversity, ethnic diversity, effects of just being a part of a different racial group can increase complex thinking in college students. So there's a lot of evidence that does show that there's strength in diversity, especially in science. So for me, the question now really isn't why we need diversity in STEM, but how do we recruit and foster a successful STEM environment for diverse individuals? And this is where it kind of ties into my training and my research, where I look at inclusive mentoring and teaching. And first and foremost, like with my journey, what I found to be very helpful is to first just get training in diversity and inclusion, and to recognize the biases that I have and to try to take action to minimize those biases. And again, the important part is like taking action and then also implementing evidence-based practices. What I found through my research and through doing all of these different trainings and listening to other people who are much better at this than I am, is that we want to use culturally relevant examples in our teaching, maybe things like scientist spotlights so that students can connect to scientists on an individual level. Community warmth and support, having a growth mindset of ourselves and of our students, having very clear structure and expectations, using active learning. There was a recent paper that was just published that highlighted that active learning will decrease the achievement gap for our students. So if we're using active learning in our classrooms, it's better for everyone. And also giving students research experiences. That's going to help promote that science identity and help retain them in the STEM field. So that's just a little bit about what I do and what I'm interested in. And yeah, I'll stop there.
Yeah, thank you. That was really great to kind of set the stage for what kind of conversations we can have around these. What are some things we can do in our own classrooms? And that kind of brings me to my first question. So I'm going to ask a series of questions and we're going to have the panelists answer them. But also, if you're watching from home, I invite you to ask some questions in the chat and on YouTube, and I'll monitor that. So my first question is, what are some barriers at UVU, or what is kind of the state of science and technology in terms of diversity and inclusion, or what are some things that we could do better at? And I think Dr. Hanewicz maybe said she had some data around this, so maybe you can start us.
Okay, I also saw that Fern was going to. Did you have a comment there, Fern, first?
Go ahead. I'll chime in after you. That's fine.
Okay. Well, yeah, at UVU, so I was looking at some data here between 2012 and 2017, is in 2012, the percentage of women in STEM field was 44%, but that's dropped to even 33% in 2017. In fact, biology, I'm glad we have lots of biologists here. That's one of the highest percentages are in your field. And the other is health professions. Now with health professions, though, we find a lot of women in Utah tend to get like maybe a certificate or an associate's. So they're still not reaching the higher levels. So these are really good entry levels, but we're really trying to get them maybe to get more in the medical field or some others with that. And generally, UVU and Utah seem to follow what we kind of call the triple threat. That's women who get grades that are lower. And when I say lower, they could be going from an A to a B. It's that internal fixed mindset. Oh my gosh, I'm getting B's and I can't do this anymore. And then very few women in some of these disciplines. And you probably see that in your classroom. I've had classrooms that had no women in it, sometimes the whole semester. And then finally, just the gender stereotypes still. We still have I hear from students who will say, either an advisor or somebody in the class, women don't do that, or some have been referred to that, oh, you're here for your hobby, instead of here for your, professional training. So anyway, that kind of little snapshot here.
I'll talk a little bit about the barriers that I see for diversity in science. And I think a barrier for people that are coming from diverse backgrounds, whether ethnic or women in science, which is a huge barrier, it's just they don't have a lot of role models. And I think that's one reason why, as university faculty members and administrators, that as we bring people in, it's important to reach out to communities that are diverse, to say, hey, come work at UVU. And so the students here they can visualize it. Oh, there are women in science, or people from this ethnicity in science. I can do that. Because if you can't visualize it, then you really won't even think you can do it. And I think the problem even goes back even further than when they get to college. I think a big barrier for diversity in STEM fields is in middle school, when kids really are starting to figure out, or trying to figure out, where do I belong in this world? And we need to, as people that care about having a diverse representation and women in science and others, we need to reach out to them in outreach events and be role models for them, because the barriers really start really young for kids. And we need to make an effort to really let them know that it is possible, that they can do this. One of a great influencer in my life was my tennis coach. When I started playing tennis when I was 8, and he was my high school coach, and on, just a wonderful role model for me. And one of his quotes was this. He said, people tend to become what they think you think they are. And I really have thought a lot about that. If people know that they think that you think they can do something, then it becomes part of the realm of possibility for them. And I overcoming these barriers for students really starts young, and we need to focus that. I know as a college, we do many outreach events, and a lot of the people here have been involved in outreach events, but letting people know that there are women, there are people of color, there are all these different things, different people that love science, and they can love science, and that they can do science is hugely important. So anyway, that's my 2 cents worth.
I think I'll add on to that and agree that it is important to increase representation in science, but it's also important for those of us who are already in science to take on that responsibility and create that inclusive environment. So when we do recruit more diverse individuals, that they're being retained. So that's also really important, that ownership shouldn't fall on that role modeling shouldn't be 100% on women or people of color or the LGBTQ faculty member or anything like that. It should be on all of our responsibilities to create these environments for everyone and to be mindful of that. And there's a lot of literature that does suggest that having someone that has similar identities to you is really important, but it's also just as equally important to have a professor who might not be able to relate to your identities, but can at least understand and be culturally competent. So I'll just add that on as well. That is a barrier, I think, is that individuals who might not be trained in this then are just uncomfortable when it comes to different identities. And it's not that they don't care, they just don't know how to talk and how to address it. And it's not coming from a place of hatred or anything wrong. It's just coming from a place of like, I don't know what to do. And so if there's training on knowing what to do, that will help decrease those barriers.
Now I can add in more in terms of first generations and the types of environments that we want to foster to make sure they're inclusive for our first generation college students. Looking at like the research of first generation college students and kind of the history there, a lot of the research is actually fairly current. So in 2012, there was a paper published called The Unseen Disadvantage, which really highlighted that even our first generation students, if they don't necessarily look too different than our continuing generation students, there's big gaps in culture in what they value when they're coming into the university. That study in particular found that the vast majority of our first generation college students are really strongly valuing communal enterprises and community. And what they found when they started looking at different universities and the cultures at universities is that universities by and large are not communal. They value individual pursuit. It's can you pass this class? Can you get this grade? And much less about community as a whole. And what's kind of stemmed from that initial research is more research looking at science in specific. And it turns out that the way in which we show science in classrooms and the experiences students have in science classrooms determines how they view science. And if they're viewing science as individualistic, first generation students are much, much less likely to be motivated to continue on with it, even though science does have very strong kind of communal orientations that are present in the discipline. But when they enter like an introductory science class, and all the tests they take individually and they sit and they work individually, then the culture we're communicating in our classrooms is not the culture of science. And that's kind of a major barrier to our first generation college students who might be interested in science, but the way it's being taught in the culture in our classrooms isn't reflective of that kind of cultural aspect. So for our first generation college students, I think that that's a primary way that in our classrooms we can generate those types of environments. And I will kind of build off of and highlight Britt's contribution, the idea that kind of active learning as a tool for learning, particularly collaborative-based active learning practices, can kind of help with this, generating this types of social environment and culture.
Yeah, I have a couple of comments. So I do agree with Fern. The role model is very important. So the mentorship is so important. I did see the transformation in my own research students. I have worked with a lot of international female students. So in the beginning, they were not sure if they could do it because they're working with all those, male professors, male students together. Seems like they are at a disadvantage. But through research, through the mentorship, I can see they are really gaining confidence and ability. So they feel like, okay, I can do this. This field is not only for men. So then it is a great way to break this barrier in science.
I'd like to chime in something, a little comment, a few comments here, based on what I've been hearing. I've heard that culture can be a barrier, and which could be, and there's also this thing about students focusing in the classroom. The focus is the grades. Can I want to make an A. If I don't make that A, that's not good, and I've heard Cheryl say that the tendencies, okay, they want to drop out, they're ready to quit. And if mentoring is so effective, what makes it so that effective? I think it's because we stop looking at students based on a group as opposed to looking at students as individuals. You are on a mentoring situation. It's a one-to-one interaction between you and that student feel valuable. They feel that they are being given time, and time is precious, and the learning is not under stress because you are being mentored by somebody who cares for you, who wants to see you successful in what you're doing, and who embrace all of who you are, that person, that student, regardless of what they are, male, female, LGBT, whatever it may be, you are embraced. Because I have come across some very, very odd situations as I mentor students, and I just ignore those negatives and just embrace the positive of the student. You can't do that in the classroom. Because you are looking at the entire class as one, and you're not looking at the individual. And people tend to get lost in that and eventually disappear. So I think that somehow we have to come up with ways whereby we can actually reach to individual students. Maybe during the lecturing, call them by name. It might shock them initially, but then they'll get used to it. But then at least they know my name is known by this professor. And it kind of make them feel, I think it makes people feel as if, okay, I'm wanted here. I need to be here. Therefore, I can do it. Other people believe in me, therefore I can do it. That's what I'm getting from all of you and from my own experiences.
Great, thank you all so much. What I'm hearing, I think, being said is let's help students envision themselves as scientists and the great diversity of students that we have at UVU. Let's make sure there's room for those. So this summer I was in a workshop talking about decolonizing your syllabus, making sure you have readings from people of color, from women scientists. Make sure you're using examples from a wide range of places or perspectives. Don't assume everyone approaches the things the same way that you do. So kind of related to this idea of pluralism and a lot of perspectives, I wanted us to think for a minute about, well, what happens if we just ignore them? Say, there's critics that say, okay, this is a great trend right now. Well, let's get back to the real issues, which is, these science questions that we have. So how might you respond to someone who says, yeah, this is great, but really, do we really need it? What are the consequences of ignoring these issues of representation, racism, gendered science? Can we just ignore those? What happens if we do?
I think it would be a tremendous loss to the community, because we are more than a physical body. We have mind, we have a spirit, we have perspectives. We are unique, every one of us. We are not the same, even if we come from the same womb almost at the same time, twins. But we are unique and we have different perspectives. If we ignore diversity, I think that we are ignoring a part of ourselves, a part of us, that it's not important. And I think that's a tremendous loss to us when we do that.
And from another perspective, so using my own experience, when I was in China, I was working with some professors, in geology field. It was kind of very strange situation because a few professors, they were dominant in the field, which means they are very authoritative. They can publish anything basically. And then young scientists and female scientists have very little say on everything. So then it is a very strange situation. So to the least, we are seeing the stagnant status in science, which means no progress, no innovation, no creativity. So people's performance, people's productivity are hindered. So then is the least. So diversity is so important for, the progress of the science development. It doesn't matter which specific discipline. So it is very important. I hope the situation has changed right now, especially in earth science discipline. I believe, diversity is also a very important issue in Chinese universities, in the workplaces. Yeah.
So I'll talk about, let's look at it economically. The Utah contains three of the fastest growing STEM cities, which is Provo, Salt Lake, and Ogden. And if you look at Silicon Slopes, they are begging for diversity of all types. And, you know, research also has shown that companies that are more diverse are more innovative. And right now, they also make more money. And it's also a better working environment, so they tend to retain people at higher rates. So right now, Utah we are so poised to be able to be graduating students, all students in these STEM fields, because realistically, we need them. And I'm afraid that if we can't meet that, you know, our Silicon Slopes that's developing, they're going to start looking elsewhere. And I know that some companies are already importing talent because they can't find what they want here. And a lot of them do have such a focus on diversity. So we can do better.
So I can bring in a perspective of kind of the current position of science in society. So right now we're at an age where science distrust is at an all-time high, that the public who are non-scientists aren't able to really understand kind of the value of science in many of these areas around the country. And if we look at like the history of the 20th century, a lot of that is scientists not being able to communicate why their work matters in many cases to people who are non-scientists. So why are you engaging in this work? Why does this work matter? Why does it matter to me? I think with our first generation college students, if they can maintain their culture as they move into the science field, there's always the potential of the science field itself becoming more engaged with the community. The big trick of that is, as first generation college students kind of move through the current system to become a scientist, that really forces you to become individualistic, unfortunately. But like, how do we maintain that culture in a way in which science, the culture of science itself, can be more communal and be more connected to the public? I think that the big challenge kind of moving forward is, how do we engage the community? And I think first generation college students bring in a culture that is much more likely to engage the community in the science enterprise.
Just wanted to make sure no one else wanted to comment on that. Britt, did you have a comment? I couldn't tell.
No, everyone has already, said everything that you would lose so much by ignoring it. And also kind of distance science again, which is, I think, exactly what kind of like Josh was talking about. Like, that's kind of the last thing that we need right now. We don't need to distance ourselves and be like, we're too good to talk about these things, because we're really not. And there's a lot of issues within STEM that need to be addressed, and to ignore it is be on the wrong side of history for sure.
Okay, good. So what advice might you give to faculty watching or students on how they can start thinking about these issues or incorporating some diversity inclusion work into their own work, or maybe how they could even get involved in some of the things you're doing?
I really liked what Britt said about overcoming your biases and thinking about the way you perceive people and understanding that you're coming from a certain perspective. I think it's so important for all people in this country and world to realize that we have a way of seeing things, and we need to step out of that and be really cognizant of other people and other ways of seeing things, and appreciate that they're coming from a different background, and embrace that and embrace them. And I think we as educators really need to have training. Again, what Britt said, that we can learn how to be better at this. We need to learn, all of us need to learn how to overcome these unconscious biases and be more embracing and more nurturing to to people of all stripes, people like us, people different than us, people that have different opinions, and know that there's value in all of that. And it makes everybody stronger to embrace that. So I appreciate what Britt had said. Maybe she'll talk a little bit more about how we can learn, how we can be trained and overcome these unconscious biases that we have.
Yeah, part of that, Fern, is micro-messaging. That's something that's come up recently. Sometimes they call microaggressions, but those micro-messages work both ways. And when early on, when I was doing the research with Susan Manson, what we found listening to the girls' stories was that a comment they would hear these women, you know, that were graduated, and they were talking about in 8th grade, their 8th grade, you know, journalist teacher said, boy, you really wrote a good story here. And it changed their lives and their whole trajectory of, boy, I can write. And the opposite held true. We'd have students say, yeah, I was going to be a veterinarian, but, you know, my 8th grade math advisor, you know, said that my grades weren't good. So I might as well just, you know, find something else now to have time to, you know, skill up in a different area. And I think we see these and we're all guilty. I mean, I do it too. Sometimes something's coming out of your, you know, coming out of your mouth, and when you're responding to something. And so that's, if you look at, you know, training, I think that's kind of an important piece of that right there. And I know we are part of the National Alliance for Partnership and Equity, and they have some really good messaging training that we could bring here right now if we're looking for practical things that we could assist here at UVU.
For training, I was just looking at the inclusion and diversity website through UVU. And so if faculty are like interested on the resources that UVU could provide, it looks like there's a foundations of inclusion workshops. And so that would probably be a good place to start for specific resources that UVU can provide. And then there are a ton of different trainings outside of UVU as well through professional organizations and things like that. So getting that training, there's definitely a lot of resources out there for faculty and staff who might be interested in that.
So I think it's important for faculty staff to realize the educational pipeline is so important for our students. So we need to be trained first, but we have to provide the resources and access to underrepresented groups intentionally, because students are not only taking our classes, they're taking so many different classes in UVU. So if we all do you know, good things, and then they feel, okay, this is the place for me. I'm not a minority. I can learn, I can gain different skills in UVU from class to class, from different discipline to disciplines. So the, you know, the overall picture is very important. Not only us as a group to address diversity, but as a university, we need to address this problem.
And I would also like to add, you know, to receive training and then implement that very kind of strategically in your practice, in your classrooms too. We have the mentoring side, but we also, we're limited in the number of students we can reach through mentoring in terms of like the total amount of students that we teach. Think about what you can do in your classroom. And I would think about, well, how can you be very clear about like what gaps are in my classroom right now? So what is the grade differential between my first generation and my non-first generation students? What is the grade differential in my classrooms between women and men? What is the grade differential between my minority students, underrepresented minorities, and my underrepresented minorities? What does that differential look like? What are action plans I can take based off of my trainings that I've done in order to try to reduce that gap? And evaluate yourselves, you know, to what extent can I make these shifts? I think if we have actionable plans that we're actually getting feedback with kind of data in our classrooms, that might be a good way of kind of approaching being more inclusive in your classroom.
You know, Joshua, you reminded me of something also, that it's as simple as who do you look like, who do you look at when you're talking? I mean, we have found that if there's a few students, and that's of any diversity, generally they're not looked at as much, you know, they're kind of looked over. or who you call on, you know, we've looked at research on that as well, is if everybody's raising their hand and it's a math question or a science question, who do you tend to be calling on? And again, in some classes, certainly not all, and that is more toward, you know, males than females. So yeah, there's lots of room for looking at behaviors all over, you know.
So where do we begin then? There are so many resources you guys just mentioned, and can we absorb all of this so that we can be effective with in our classrooms or mentoring? You know, but I think that one of the things that we can do without any training, okay, training is very important, is that we need to learn to listen a little better, be a little more sensitive to the needs of students, because remember, we were once there. And you indicated, several of you indicated how you remembered, or perhaps you know of someone who remembered a response from a teacher in the 8th grade. I've experienced that, and that stayed with me even today. So can you be that person who says something to a student that encourages that student to fly? Can we take on that responsibility? And again, that's something that we don't need training on, although the training would allow us to explore these various options that we've just talked about. But just to learn to reach out, be patient, and what is it that this student need? And it's not even a big philosophical statement that you need to make. Just something that this student is looking for, and they need to hear receive some affirmation from mentor or professor, so that they can do better, or encouraged to try to do more.
So under this pandemic situation, is even more challenging, you know, for students to realize they can work with others, they can work with a diverse group. For example, before our panel, I just finished upper division class. It is a very diverse group, because we have science majors, we have integrated university studies major. So all majors present, a lot of majors in the class. And at the same time, we do go through math, because the energy on Earth is a broad topic a lot of students are interested in. I try to make them to work in groups, even though it's a virtual group, but still they benefited. I did kind of like check in with them to see how they are doing. A lot of them said, you know, yeah, I have an awesome group. I'm learning a lot from my group. So for us, we need to provide the opportunity for students to expose them to a diverse group. They will experience, they will see, you know, how powerful a diverse group can do. So they are seeing the excellence from others. At the same time, they are also learning, they are growing.
Oh, okay, great. Thank you all so much. I want to change directions for a minute and think more even about our departments and our College of Science, or just kind of institutionally, what might some practices be, or techniques we can have for making our programs, our departments, our colleges more open to diversity, or more responsive to some of these issues.
Well, clearly our hiring. So when I started in technology management, I had, they were mostly male students. And what was so interesting is usually a couple of weeks in, they would actually say, I'd never had a female student before, or female student. I've never had a female faculty member before. And sometimes I never had more female students even in my classes. So, and then also most of my mentoring, people often think that I do a lot of mentoring with the women, which I do. But by far the most mentoring I do is with the male students. And, you know, in some conversations too, after getting to know them, they find that is helpful as anything, as any woman does, being able to interact in thinking about it and just being even exposed to it. And I rarely have conversations with them about women, but they themselves will come to that after, you know, working with them for a period of time. And then they start noticing things within their own business where they're working. So just the experience helps all people.
Yeah, thanks. And I think maybe Britt, you can talk more about microaggressions, kind of help us understand a little bit about what those are and how they might even be impacting work with our colleagues and collaborators.
Yeah, so microaggressions have like originally stemmed from, I think more of like the racial stereotypes that people will experience. And so there's a really good paper by Kimberly Tanner that talks about microaggressions in science. And they're like small little comments that in the moment you're like, okay, that was weird. Why did that person say that? But then they start piling up over time, and then they start to really leave an impact. And I experienced a lot of microaggressions when I was pregnant of like people telling me what I couldn't do. And like the first one was like, okay, whatever. And then after the 10th one, I'm like, this is getting really old. Can we stop doing this? And so these microaggressions just keep, and they're just like really tiny. Sometimes they can be larger. And so they're more like insulting. And then you start recognizing those. Wait, where were we going with this question? Just like, what are microaggressions and how can we avoid them?
Yeah, and some examples like you gave were really good. I think a lot of people maybe have heard this microaggressions, but don't really know what they are.
Yeah, and I think the paper in Kimberly Tanner, she has like a couple examples of what this might look like, of like a student taking an exam, and if it's like a female or a woman, or a student who identifies as a woman, and they're taking an exam, and at the end they turn in the paper and they're like, I didn't do well on this because like girls aren't good at science. Like that would be like a self-inflicting microaggression. Other things are like if you have a Black student in your classroom and maybe like another student says like, oh, you must be like the athlete then in the classroom. So that would be another example of like a stereotype and a microaggression. And so one of the things that we can do as instructors are address them. And so again, a lot of other people who are much better at this than I, when you hear those microaggressions, be like, ooh, ouch, like what did you mean by that? Can you explain what you meant by that comment? And just kind of get to like the root of what that comment was supposed to mean. And then it helps like students and or faculty or whoever you're talking to kind of evaluate why they said what they said. And if it's stemming from stereotypes, then maybe address that and be like, well, you know, let's think about that type of language that we're using. Because in the moment, again, it might not seem like it's a big deal, but over time, they just pile on and you get really tired of them fairly quickly.
One thing that we've been working on in the college, at the college level, is to ensure that when we have a job posting going out for a new faculty member, that it has verbiage in it that supports people that have diverse backgrounds and encourages people and people with experience with working with diverse groups of students. And so I think it is a cultural shift as this conversation is more prevalent, and as we talk about it and hire new people, this is going to get better as we get rid of this old stodgy, oh, I'm this academic guru and it doesn't matter what I say and what I do, because it does. How you approach people. One thing that I do in my classes is I give shout outs to the people that are doing well, and I congratulate them and I tell them I'm proud of what they're doing. And people are struggling, I'll reach out and say, what can I do? And I do that as a blanket. I don't target any group of students. It's an online class, so I don't really know what the diverse population is, other than mostly they're women. But I think that's important. Like Eddy said, I love Eddy's approach of just being kind and listening and changing that mindset of everything I say is important. Listening to what other people have to say and the students is really important. And also, again, as I mentioned, just the culture will shift as we bring more people that are interested in this and aware of this issue as new faculty members. So anyway, that's just some thoughts.
Other thoughts on like, oh, sorry.
go ahead.
No, you definitely go for it. I think we might be saying the same thing, so.
Yeah, we might be. So the biology department has a new inclusion committee right now, and we're thinking about this quite a bit each week, and kind of going off of the idea of having a culture change. A big thing of how you can actually be actionable with a culture change is actually tracking to see what is the current culture, measuring it, seeing how people actually feel in a department, and what are areas where we as a department can move forward and make changes so that everybody does feel included. And that's kind of what we're exploring right now as a department, is how can we actually go about and actually collect data about this and see if the things we're doing, things we're changing are actually helping.
That's really cool. Can you give us some examples of the types of questions you're asking your colleagues, or the measurements you're giving, or how are you going about this?
So we're just in the beginning phases. So we're working on trying to find a validated and published measure, which has lots of prior support of being able to look at different aspects of inclusivity. And our plan is to implement that starting this fall, now that the committee was just formed this semester. So we're getting everything off the ground.
And we're also talking a lot about when we do recruit diverse candidates, then what policies and or measures and supports are in place to keep them. So it's great that we can, try to recruit a bunch of diverse candidates, but when they come here and they're like, I don't know if I'm going to belong here. Like, how do we ease that transition and be like, no, like we really care about this, and we care about you. We care about the exciting new things that you're going to bring here at UVU. And so what can we do to really show that when they do come?
Yeah, good. That sounds really cool. I'm excited to learn more about the biology, your work, your department's work. I want to push you a little further though to explain that when you're talking about the culture of the department, like what kind of things are you talking about that? Because I think sometimes we hear that like, oh, the culture of science might be this, but like, what really does that mean? Britt or Josh, do you want to comment on that? Or anyone else can too.
Yeah,
I wasn't sure if somebody else had a comment, so I didn't want
to. We don't want to dominate.
Yeah.
No, that's fine. I think the part that you discussed of really important, thinking about how we support faculty and different kind of initiatives and policies. I know when I joined UVU, I had a baby, for a few years ago, and I got 2 weeks off for my maternity leave. And I was like, holy Toledo, that's not enough. And I was really happy when President Jimenez joined. That was one of the first things that she changed, was the maternity leave policy. And that was huge. That's a huge, I think, game changer for a lot of women faculty. But back to this idea of culture, yeah.
I think what it means, at least how I would interpret it, would be like the idea of what science has been and should continue to be based on like these standards that have been in place forever, like however long. And like even thinking back on like my PhD experience, and there would be certain things that like my PhD advisor would say, well, like I went through this, so therefore you're going to go through it. I'm like, but why? It's a different world nowadays, and we have Google, so let's maybe think about different ways on how I can still get to where you were at, but just maybe through different mechanisms. So I think at least that's what comes to mind when I think of like this culture of like I did it this way, therefore you have to do it that way. And if you had primarily, white male faculty for however long time, and like they didn't maybe have to worry about having a new baby, and you didn't have to worry about taking time away to go pump, and or this and that, and like just the recovery of things, so of delivery, and all of that. So there's just different cultural things that maybe certain previous generations of scientists didn't have to worry about that now newer generations do. And so how does like that culture change to acknowledge that?
Yeah, and even with service. Oh, I'm sorry, Joshua, go ahead.
Oh, well, we're going back and forth now. I'll just quickly say, in terms of like components of culture and like how we look at that at like a department level to make sure we kind of have inclusivity. Some different aspects of that might be, do members of a department feel like they have a common purpose, that they're actually unified and that they're all working towards the same goal? Is there equal access to opportunities to actually advance as a professional for each individual of a department? It could be, is there equitable rewards that are provided based off of achievement in the department? Or is that kind of unequal for individuals who are achieving very similar things? It could have to do with cultural competence. So do other individuals in a department feel as if those around them can understand their culture and what they bring in terms of being diverse individuals? It could have to do with trust. It could also be a sense of belonging. Do you feel like you're actually part of a department? Or do you feel like you're isolated within this larger sphere? And overall kind of respect. Now, is there mutual respect amongst individuals within kind of a department group? So those are just a bunch of potential smaller pieces of how we can really talk about kind of culture in a department, if that kind of helps define that a bit better.
And a big piece of that is service. So that's one thing, if you look at historically, women do a lot more service, and that also leaves them less likely to have time for research, particularly if they do have children, or they still do most of the things off, in the homes. So I think, very practical is who's doing service and at what level. Because if you're doing all the department service, you're taking, believe me, I've been asked to take minutes and make coffee many, many times. That when you're going up for your promotion isn't going to be as important as if you're doing, the Utah Valley University level, like a UPAC or something. So particularly for your department chair, that's really important to see take a look at who's doing what service and for how long, and how that will, and where they are in their RTP process.
Yeah, I have a comment about the culture thing. Yeah, all departments are awesome on campus, but our earth science department is very diverse and inclusive. I think we are very unified. Then it is a good culture, what we value, how we interact with each other, how we value each other. So we have a very diverse group from, a lot of different countries. We have different disciplines. But so far, I can see why we are so productive, where our excellence is from the diversity, is from the collaboration. This culture is very important for our department.
Yeah, thank you, Weihong. I'm also in earth science, so of course I'm biased and think we do a great job. But I think part of it is this feeling valued and collaborating and making sure that voices are heard. This can also be, as new faculty come in, making sure that they have a voice at the table too. That can be a really vulnerable position, but making sure that they're being heard, and that they have a mentor, someone they can reach out to in case they need some guidance or have questions. And that can be someone outside of your own department. I know when I was going for RTP, the RTP committee was all male. So I requested a female from another department to be on the committee. Not that I thought my colleagues, I wasn't accusing them of doing anything bad, but I just wanted that, a little bit more equitable look at my tenure packet. And that's something that as faculty we can ask for. We have rights, and if you're finding yourself in a situation where you think you might need an advocate, that's a really appropriate question or a thing to ask for. And I think Fern can help us as the admin in our panel. I'm just going to call her out and say that we can ask Fern if we have questions about those things.
Yes, you may ask me. And if I don't know the answer, I can find the answer.
You know, that's a very, very important point that you made, Hilary, because I didn't know that. I didn't know that you can say, hey, I need some help, or I'd like to have a different, some different faces. I didn't know that. So it's good to know. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, we're almost out of time. So I guess in the last few minutes, we have a few comments on chat that I think we've addressed. One was about making hiring more inclusive. I think we addressed that a little bit, thinking about not just hiring, but also supporting faculty as they come in. And then there was also a comment actually for you, Dr. Hanewicz, saying that this person was a first-gen student in one of your classes, and you suggested they apply to Goldman Sachs, and they would have never had that idea unless you specifically called it out. So these kind of little things that we might seem small, but really like going that extra mile and providing students with kind of this empowerment, helping them hopefully realize that they too belong in these places. So as we close out, maybe just see one or a few comments about how people might get in touch with you, or if they're interested in following up on some of these questions.
Anybody can just send me an email, jpremo@uvu.edu. My work right now is really kind of focusing on first generation college students, specifically in like intro science courses, and that's where I'm kind of been expanding. So.
Yeah, and I think I'm just going to speak for Earth Science Department. We might invite you to sometime to come speak to our faculty meeting even. I think any faculty watching can invite any of us to come just give a real brief conversation or even a training to your faculty about some of these issues. I think all of us are more than happy to do that.
Yeah, and if they go to, anybody who goes to UVU professional pages, they can put in the person's name, can get the information. But I guess I just thought of maybe one final comment when you just were talking about that was, after we did a research brief on Utah women in STEM, we run a number of shows. We were invited to go to a number of places. And what we still talk about is every place we went, women came up and had a story about being in STEM and dropping out. So that's the other part of all this, is there's a lot of regret there. You know, there were computer science and there was no other females, or sometimes we forget as we get older, nobody wanted to date them because they were out of their element or not part of the group. So people don't forget. They don't forget their dreams and their aspirations, and they don't forget the moment when they realize they can't do that. So this has been a really good panel. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you all. I was really pleased to learn from my colleagues, and I'm excited for us all to work together for the College of Science and for any STEM field across the UVU campus. Yeah, to commit to these things, and let's make a difference, and let's make Utah Valley University a better place for everyone. So I think that's it. That's our time. Please, if you're watching, feel free to get in touch with any of us. I'm Hilary Hungerford. I organize the panel, so you can find me. I'm in Earth Science. And thanks all for your contribution, and have a beautiful rest of your day.
Thank you.